Scramble, scramble! Hello, and welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, another wizard podcast from James Holland and I, here from Blighty. Now, why am I talking like this, Jim? Why have I gone all wizard prang? Why am I talking about pebble monkeys?
I think it's because you've been visiting the Bomber Command Memorial.
Absolutely. I went to the Bomber Command Memorial in the heat wagon, and we ran in. Yes, well, the International Bomber Command Memorial. Actually, start with the trivial mucking about. So, I've been on tour. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, by the way, the Second World War podcast with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. James deep in deepest Wiltshires. The clocks have gone back, and I used the extra A. I actually used the extra A yesterday and tidied up my office. You can't tell at a glance, but I have rearranged.
Well, no, but I can see there's a plastic storage box with stuff in it.
Exactly.
That's very much part of the whole process, isn't it? Of moving it into a box.
That may go into the loft,
and then it sits there for a month.
It may go to the loft. It may not.
It may not.
So we went.
You may start pulling it back out again.
Yeah, mate. There's every chance that everything in there will end up back on a shelf. Anyway, we've been on tour, and so due to the curious route, I've been very busy. We've been doing signings, and they've been fantastic. And I've met lots and lots of independent company members who, if you're new to this podcast, are people who have subscribed to our Patreon. And we've had a lot of requests for Singapore, James. That we have. Why haven't you done Singapore? Some bloke he wasn't obby with me, but he was like, "Why haven't you done Singapore yet?" And then he got into a story about, I think either his father or his grandfather was there. And he was Royal Army Service Corps, and he had a hunch it was all going to go tits up. And so he decided to send his best people across to North Africa to get them out of Singapore. And so was sending people to North Africa to get them somewhere where they could be useful, which I think is really interesting.
Very interesting.
So we've had a couple of requests for Singapore, and some, just some very nice feedback, and lots of people who love the podcast. It was in Bluewater in Dartford. There was a lad called George who absolutely loves the podcast, loves listening. Hello, George. I hope you enjoy the book. So it's been, I suppose, it's what you'd call outreach if you use that kind of lingo. Anyway, but due to
basically like, in a way, you're a bit like Monty, aren't you? Before D-Day, visiting all the people,
handing out cigarettes,
and telling them that you're going to beat Wommel, and it's all going to be fine.
And we've had lots of lovely feedback as well about Alamein week, haven't we? People have
nice. Very nice.
Really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed doing it enormously. It was great fun.
Well, yes, and there's just so much to think about. But tell me first of all, before we get onto that, I think we need to have an Alamein wash up.
We do, yeah.
But before we get on to the Alamein wash up, how did you find the International Bomber Command Memorial?
Well, so we were in Dorking on Friday night, and then Skegness on Saturday night. So,
holy moly, God!
Don't. We've had to have words with my agent, and because I think we're at the stage of the tour where he's got a road atlas and a blindfold and some drawing pins. Right? And because that's not even alphabetical order.
That way, doesn't it?
Dorking to Skegness it is alphabetical order, but there's no E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, S, in between. Anyway, the point is, so what we did after Dorking, we drove to Lincoln because Skegness is quite a drive because you come off the motorway. Got to Lincoln in the middle of the night. And then, and as we were going up, I said to Adam, my tour manager, I said, I'd really like to go to this place because we've not been. Because we last time we went up to Lincolnshire, we went to Scampton where we met the Naughty Red Arrows, as they're now called, and flying the flag
for Team GB.
Team GB, and
that was one of the funniest afternoons ever. Every time I think about that, it makes me laugh.
It's really, really funny. Yeah, and so
what's it really like being in a Hawk and doing all those manoeuvres? Well, obviously very proud to fly the flag for Team GB. No, but what's it like?
Tell us. How'd you do your rehearsals? Well, what we fly the flag for Team GB. Anyway, as the jets roar past as well for in situ atmos.
They are amazing, though. You can't get away from it.
It was absolutely amazing. It was an extraordinary thing to see. But it was
brilliant. I loved it.
But his sort of vocal aerobatic display was just as impressive.
Well, I felt it didn't quite match the skill of the of the flying, I have to say.
Anyway,
charming though he was.
Anyway, so last time we didn't go, and it's really well done. It's not a museum, is their thing, right? So there are no aircraft, there's no bits of twisted metal. It's a memorial and a memorial sort of portal for people to bring stuff to them that then goes into the archive at the University in Lincoln, right? So if you've got a relative who got his papers, they scan them, they digitize them, then they do the metadata out of the university.
Do they?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that cool, right?
That's really cool. So they've got an amazing archive now, have they?
They have got an amazing gathering archive.
And is Dan Ellen in charge of that?
Yes, Dan Ellen runs the archive over at the University of Lincoln.
Okay, now
and so Dan, I let Dan know and said, "Oh, by the way, we're going," and he popped up when we were halfway around the museum. And so it's not a museum, halfway around the displays and stuff. So what you've got is this, very contemporary rusted metal spire. And so it's like the spire of Lincoln Cathedral would have, in the old days. It's the height of Lancaster's wingspan, this spire. So it stands very tall. And you're really...
103 feet.
And I was really struck. It's 103 feet. And I was really struck by that because normally you see a Lancaster flat and you don't get the sense of actually how enormous it is, right? Yeah. So that was interesting in itself. And it's rusted metal. And then they have these plates in concentric circles around the spire. And you're on a hill looking down over Lincoln, like a sort of parallel hill to the hill the cathedral's on, right?
Lovely.
It's beautiful. And so you get the sense of the view of flying over Lincoln and, what that would have been like. And then in concentric circles, you've got these plates that are sort of a couple of meters wide with the names of all the 55,000 Bomber Command crew who were killed, who were lost.
Wow.
Right? And it's very sobering. It starts with the Lincolnshire ones and then so it's the 1 of 5 group in the interior. And then it's the other Bomber Command squadrons and groups outside that, right? But it's everybody international because they're really stressing that Bomber Command was an international effort, it was a Commonwealth effort, a Duke effort, right? So that's really well presented, and there are names all the way along the path as you walk to the spire of people who've donated. They've also got the standing silhouette things, memorial poppy memorial people as well.
Yep.
Although they're all conflicts, so you've got Falklands War people in that, which isn't jarring, but is also sort of interesting that they've sort of compromised with that. It just compromise is the wrong word, but they've accommodated that, right?
Yes.
But the spire is really, really striking, and the names, because there's just so many of them, and there's so many of these rusting iron plates. It's really, really moving and really, really gets you right in here, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, we went with my tour manager, Adam, who his uncle was lost in Bomber Command. His mother, his mother never knew her brother. He was killed. I think when she was a little girl, because I think she's 90. So he was killed when she was a little girl. So she doesn't have any proper memory of him. And he went missing, right? And the family legend was that he was a tail gunner, right? So we get there and I say to Adam, so Adam rings his mum and says, what would you think if he's on the memorial, what do you think he's going to be known as? Right? Because we didn't know if he was on the memorial. Oh, KJ Gill. Right, okay. So you get there and in alphabetical order, we work our way through and we found him in the bottom right-hand corner of one of these plates, on the same plate as Guy Gibson. Although the point of the memorial is not 617 Squadron and not the not the high points.
You're all in it together, right?
Show business people. It's that it's every the people who became stars. It's the point of the whole effort, right? And there he is, right? And it's incredibly moving. And Adam rang his mum and said, I found him. He's on here, and she didn't know about the memorial, International Bomber Command Memorial. She didn't know about it. So now she knows about it. Now she knows her brother's commemorated. Anyway, then we go around the displays, and they've got four really, really good films about the development of the bomber. The bomber will always get through. First World War bombing, Second World War bombing, and what a wonky start it all gets off to. And then the 4 engine bombers coming online, and the absolute, the horrendous pasting that Germany then cops from Bomber Command, right? And this thing of, learning to fly before you can drive, the training, how intense it was, what they were doing with and to people. Then you've got a display all the way around the lower display hall, which is a sortie. So, briefing here, all the way around, and then when they get home, which runs around the whole thing. There's a sort of audiovisual Flyer Lancaster thing where you pick up the thing, you choose which crewman you want to be, and then you've got to tap the buttons and do your duties, right?
Lovely, yeah.
They run a presentation of a raid, and then they have the really striking thing is they have on the AV screen, the big AV screen, they have a 1939 to 1945 bombing in Europe infographic thing, and it goes, and it's got large raid, big circle, small raid, medium raid, small effort, and it's pinpricks of light for 1939. It's one big one on Warsaw, and then there's just pinpricks. And then it goes sort of, then there's nothing, right, for quite a while, and then it starts to hot up in,
1942 a bit.
1940. Then there's the bombing that accompanies the Blitzkrieg,
yes,
and then there's the Blitz, and then it sort of quietens down a bit. But what's fascinating, right? And Dan said they've assembled this all from secondary sources. It's impossible to go through all the squadron logbooks and log all the raids. It's just too big a job. So they've assembled it from secondary sources and stuff, right? And they had a massive spreadsheet, and they were trying to keep track of absolutely everything: size of the effort, date, time, the whole thing, right? So this huge, obviously, this enormous, unwieldy document to try and get it all in. And Malta's at the very bottom, like flashing away, like it's like, for 2 years, like basically a flame. Yeah. But it's just so interesting watching the different offensives play themselves out. And the one place that's copying it the entire time, relentlessly, where is it? Where do you think that is?
So someone like Cologne or somewhere like that.
No. Think about the bigger picture, Jim. What's the one thing you really need to interdict if you're the British Isles?
Oh, you're trying to stop them, you mean?
Yeah, what's the one place
target
that gets...
over Germany?
What's target? No, not in Germany. Brest is hammered relentlessly for the entire...
Isn't that interesting? What, because of the U-boats and all the rest of it?
Obviously, right? You're trying to win the Battle of the Atlantic, aren't you? So Brest is just going like this.
So Brest is completely smashed
essentially on a daily basis. As this graphic runs, and they've got all the mine laying.
Isn't that interesting?
They've put all the mine laying in as well. So because I said this to Dan, I said I was really struck by the way Brest. He said, obviously it's the Battle of the Atlantic, and you can find it. It's not like
it's a hop and a skip, isn't it?
It's not like
it's
a
not
hop
like
and a
going
skip.
to flipping Regensburg, is it?
Yeah, exactly. And you fly to the end of France, basically. It's easy to picture as a navigational, or not easy, easier, more straightforward, right?
Isn't that interesting?
And what's clear right from the start of the German occupation of France, Brest is getting it, and then other places where there are obviously German maritime things, and so that coastal command,
presumably Lorient and all those sort of places
exactly.
as well.
Exactly. There's all that going on.
Interesting.
Right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it really, really is. And Bremen gets hit loads, doesn't it?
And then Bremen as well, right? And then what happens? And I'm watching it. And I say to Adam, because he doesn't know about this stuff, because he's not an afflicted person, just doesn't. And why would he? He's got perfectly reasonable interests outside affliction, right? And I go, they do you do 30 sorties, and then if you want to do another tour, you can. You don't have to. You go into training, and I'm explaining how it works. And all the time we're in the display, and it's going, but the rate of attrition is 1 in 4 crews completes a tour. All this sort of stuff on average. So really laying it on thick. Anyway. I say, and we're watching this thing. I say, you watch spring 1942. It's just going to start going bananas, right?
Yeah.
And the real
raids and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and what you really get into, and is the sheer disparity in strategic bombing effort during the Second World War between what the Axis are able to pull off, and then what follows after 1942. And what happens as well is that Italy starts lighting up, from early 1943. It starts lighting up, and then it lights up all the way up the boot, and then Pleisti starts lighting up, because I said to Adam, one of the big things of capturing that part of Italy, so you can strategic bomb the oil fields in Romania, and you see the whole thing. The whole war effort play itself out. And in the spring of 1944, it goes to France, and you see all of France's railways being bombed.
Yes.
And then you see the switch back to the strategic bombing campaign, and that really from February onwards in 45, from February 45 onwards, it's this gigantic fireworks show over the whole of Germany. It's so worth looking at, just to sort of. In a simple 5 minute, thing.
Maybe we could both go up and do.
I think we ought to. Anyway, so then we go in the archive, and they've got all this. They've got this saxophone, and I'm sure this constitutes a spoiler. And I may be exceeding my bounds talking about some of this stuff. But anyway, you've got this saxophone that a bloke got in a Red Cross parcel in Stalag Luft 4, and then took with him on one of the death marches when they were being marched out of their prisoner of war camp. And he hung on to this saxophone. It's quite heavy, tenor saxophone.
Yeah.
He took it all the way back with him, and then played it for the rest of his life. And now it's been given to the museum.
Isn't that fabulous?
Yeah,
that's almost that's right up there with the hidden trombone.
Exactly. That's up there with the hidden trombone. Yeah, I mean, to take it on one of those marches. No, I'm hanging on to my saxophone. But
there's something incredibly moving about holding something or seeing something that is now safe and cosseted, but which has been a witness to just such extraordinary things.
Yeah. Well, they said they
somehow survived, and the kind of the fact that the saxophone survived is obviously a kind of leitmotif, isn't it, for something bigger?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, it's very obvious, but it is really moving. It just is.
Yeah. Well, their thing is they're interested in the people, the people and the stories, and but also look completely internationally. So they've got. They're interested in the German flak crews, because they're as much part of the story of the bomb offensive as anybody else. And one of the things they just digitized when we popped into the archive, was a German flak gunner's personal diary and his service record. It's really, really, because that's part of the picture too. That's part of the whole story. Anyway, so then we look in the archive and we looked up Adam's uncle. We found the sortie, and it says when he was lost. Yep. He was in a Manchester off Pembrokeshire in the last month. In the last month that they had Manchester, so he may have been training to convert to a Lancaster, because they did some conversion in Manchesters. He was in 106 Squadron that's Guy Gibson's squadron. Yeah, exactly, out of Scampton, and out of Coningsby rather. Sorry. Gibson Squadron, and he was a navigator. He wasn't a tail gunner, as far as the records show. And they say, if the family know better, then maybe he was a tail gunner. But from as far as we could tell, he was a sergeant, and he was a navigator. When then you start, and I'm explaining to Adam what the Manchester is, like it's the forerunner of the Lancaster.
But it was rubbish and didn't work.
But it's crap, and then they luckily stopgap it into something useful. And we go. And then, you go through the history of the Manchester, and it's a terrible story. I mean, they build a couple of hundred, a third of them are lost in ops, and then 45 are lost due to engine failure. Wow. But if you could then download from Q the PDF of the squadron service record, download the Air Ministry records of what went on. So we think we're going to be able to locate Ken, and if the family have got a photo of him, they'll put it on and they'll give him his face, and they'll.
Well, we can find out. I can find out literally before we finish this podcast what he was, because it'll be. We'll just get up the. If he's 106 Squadron, when did he die?
May of 42, I think.
Okay, can do that right now.
I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take a break, and when we get back from the break, James will have the archival material for our perusal. See you in a tick. Welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Now, we left you there with an archival cliffhanger, ladies and gentlemen, as James dove deep into the National Archive and found 106 Squadron, Ken Gill's squadron. And what's really, really interesting is they're flying Manchesters and Lancasters simultaneously. So they are in the process of converting. And apparently some of the training for the Lancaster was done in the Manchester because the internal cockpit, the interior of the plane is essentially identically laid out. So you could,
so there were two squadrons that were the first two to get them. I think 106th was the first, and 44th, which was a Rhodesian squadron at the time, and they were the ones that were involved in the Augsburg raid, the ill-fated Augsburg raid, where 12 went out and only 5 came back again. This is our idea of doing a low-level flight, and literally everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, including sort of coordination with the fighters who was there supposed to go over and help them and defend them as they crossed the Normandy coast. Yeah, but of course, just didn't, it was a bit like kind of laying down an artillery barrage. It just didn't work. But the interesting thing about the so you have battalion war diaries, which is in the British case where you can find your the war diary of, I don't know, let's say the 6th Durham Light Infantry or whatever it might be. But the RAF equivalent are the ORBs, which stands for the Operational Record Book. And they are held in a department at the National Archives, formerly known as the Public Record Office, as Air 27. So it's Air 27 / whatever it might be. And the great thing is those have mostly all been digitized. So one can, you can get your own card and all the red ticket and stuff for the National Archives. But if you don't have that, it doesn't matter. You can just go on there and you can search their website. And Discovery is the search engine, and I have to say it's pretty darned efficient. And you go on that and you put in 106 Squadron and you put dates of 1942 and you press go, and there it is, and it has them listed month by month, the ORBs.
I mean, Jim,
and you download it, and literally 2 seconds later you've got it. It's incredible.
One thing that's really striking here is like this is literally if you know the guy's name in Bomber Command, you can find him. You can find what he was doing. I mean,
absolutely. In a way that you just can't with
the army.
No, because lots of people sort of go, "Oh, I want to get hold of my great uncle, and I know he was Alamein, but I don't know what unit he was in, all the rest of it." And you sort of think, well, it's like a needle in a haystack. If you've got a service number, that's one thing. If you know the unit he was in, if you absolutely know that he was in the 2nd Rifle Brigade, for example, at the snipe action,
you've got more
problem because you can go and get that war diary and you can look it up and you can go, okay, well, I know he was in there at that particular point, so therefore that is what he must have been involved with. So that's fine. But for people who just sort of vaguely know that their grandfather was serving in Germany in 1945, that's not enough. No. The only alternative way of getting around it is to apply to the Ministry of Defence for your relative's service record. And you pay 25 quid and you get in the system. All I'd say is they're still on COVID catch-up. It takes forever. But you are entitled to get it because service records are not in the public domain yet. So eventually they'll be all transferred to Kew or whatever, which is where the National Archives are. But they're not yet. So I can't go and find the service record of your grandfather at Harsbrook, for example. No, could. You could go and get his service record and call for it.
I'm allowed to ask for it. You're
allowed to ask for it, and they are not allowed to not give it to you.
Gosh,
and then you can start working it all out, and that's how you do it. But it's a bit of a process. But what we found was that because he was killed on a training mission, he's not listed in the daily list of operations.
No,
because it's not an operation; it's a training mission.
Yeah, he's not on the sorties list.
I have just downloaded I have just brought up a whole load more, 4 other documents with a total download size of 175 megabytes. So I'll download those after this and fire them over to you, and we can have a look at them at another stage. But it is possible to it should be possible to find a bit more about him for Adam, to be honest. Yeah,
I mean it is extraordinary though, because by point of comparison, Peter White, who's currently with the Jocks story on the Patreon and who's in my book, he's not mentioned by name in the battalion war diary in the 4KSB war. No, his name never comes up. Whereas what you've got here, you look at this, what you've got here is literally name by name. So you've got the entire crew of an aircraft, and
which are listed in order. So
which are listed in order. Well, yeah. I mean, in the earlier operations record book, you've got the crew. So
pilot is listed first. Then I think it's navigator
it tends
bomber engineer. I seem to remember. I can't remember what it is, and then it's
flight lieutenant. For instance, 31st of May 1942, Lancaster R5608. Flight Lieutenant Hopgood, Pilot Officer Coates, Sergeant Bates, Sergeant Gibson, Sergeant Hobson, Flight Sergeant Lewis, Flying Officer Ferguson.
Here you are. It's got the order here. So the order in which they're listed, and it's always exactly the same. It's captain, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, mid-upper, rear gunner.
Yeah,
that's your 7-man crew on a Lancaster.
Yeah. But that's what's so fascinating, because you've literally got a man by man tally, because it's an aircraft manifest, isn't it? They basically they sign everyone into the plane, and they sign everyone out when they get home, if they get home. 8th, 9th May 1942, Manchester R5770, Wing Commander Gibson. It's the pilot. Yep. I mean, we're drawn to that name. Pilot Officer.
Well, Hopgood, we're also pretty drawn to.
Well, and Hopgood, Flying Officer Hopgood, Sergeant Hogg, Sergeant Bates, Sergeant Gibson, Sergeant Hobson, Sergeant Hallam, Sergeant Lewis, in Manchester L7488. I mean, the fact that the RAF has this, I've talked about the bureaucratic level of war. I've tried to posit that as a as one of the tiers. The RAF, they're up on their bureaucracy, aren't they? Yeah. Someone's writing all this down.
Yeah.
Which was so. What was interesting was yesterday there was a little bit of chat on Twitter, people talking about Appointment in London, which is a 1952 Bomber Command movie starring Dirk Bogarde. And what happens in that is a pilot is injured, so he got killed, I think, before they take off. So he's not meant to fly anymore. He's done 87 sorties. He's been told, you've got to stop. His girlfriend's going, you've got to stop, darling. You don't need to go. It's all that.
But and he decides down the chaps.
Exactly. And he gets in the plane and flies the plane because the sortie's got to go off. And then they're listening to the master. I mean, what's really interesting, it's filmed, it's only 7 years after the war. They're listening to the master bomber. They're listening to the master bomber. And they're listening to the master bomber. What's really interesting is they're listening to the master bomber at the RAF base. The Germans are listening to it too, because there's a scene with some Germans. And what's interesting is the German scenes are not subtitled, so it's just Germans yammering it away. Von der Lancaster, all that, right?
Yep.
Right. And then there's someone listening in a pub to the Germans. I listened, there's a woman, there's a widow listening to the Germans in a pub. And that's what she does is she listens, she follows the progress of the raids to see what's happening, because it made her feel closer to her husband when he was on raids, right? This is 7 years afterwards. So they're talking about the master bomber quite openly and how that's how he did it. And there's footage cut in with, they got 3 or 4 lanks for the film, which are probably the ones that end up in the Dam Busters.
What's it called? Appointment in London.
Appointment in London. And it's about the churn in the squadron, in the squadrons, the churn of people, the toll it takes on people, the fact that even if you get home, you may yet crash and die. The whole thing, and it's and also it's all sorts of people taking pensive looks and saying, it's worth it in the end, old boy, and all that, right? It's really, really, really good. It's about a bomber station, and
and it's a good film. It is good.
I think it is actually a good. It is actually a good film. Yeah, yeah, it is.
It's like 12 O'Clock High. It's really good.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you watched 12 O'Clock High?
Of course I have. Yeah. I mean, not recently, but
it is unbelievably good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit like The Cruel Sea. It's one of those films where you sort of think, really? How can this be so good? I always thought kind of films in the 1950s were rubbish because they didn't have CGI. Well, in actual fact, they're brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, well. Well, Angels 1.5 is a good sort of this is what it was like movie. It's not. Not all of these films can be Citizen Kane, can they? And they're telling a rough truth too. I mean, that's the interesting thing about what you really feel with Appointment in London, because they're awarded the DFC or something, and so they've got an appointment in London in a month's time. They get back from a sortie. They've got an appointment in London in a month's time. So it's will they make it to London, basically, for their appointment. To completely...
The fragility of life, the uncertainty of the next mission.
Exactly. And it's really, really well done. And having been to the memorial and just this thing. 8,000 of the Bomber Command 55,000 were killed training.
Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? So what is that as a proportion? That's about 20%, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I think overall aircraft losses in the war, I think it was about 30% were accident or training or,
It's a shocking business. But so I would, if anyone, especially if anyone has a personal connection to Bomber Command, someone in the family somehow, somewhere, I would get up there, and they've got the archive. I was lucky we were allowed in the archive, but they've got, the computer where you put your relative's name in, and he should pop up like that. He should appear. Yep. And what was moving about looking at Ken's record is the names of the crew he died with. That it's not just him. That if an infantry section's mortared, the chances are they won't all be killed. But if an aircraft's hit, a bomber aircraft's hit, it's pretty close. You're pretty close to guaranteed you're all going to die. You know what I mean? It's like
I know exactly what I mean. Yeah,
blokes die in batches.
Yeah. Well, what an amazing place. Well, I'm must be keen to get up there, and frankly, I never need much of an excuse to go out to Lincoln, which is a great place.
But they said they had a veteran come in, and he had a flying helmet, right, and they had the oxygen tube into the flying helmet, and he started massaging the tube reflexively because that's what you do to stop it freezing, to keep the air from going super cold as you breathe.
Isn't that amazing?
He just started stroking the tube. It's incredible.
Wow. So, I've never heard that. That's amazing. That is amazing.
It is really fascinating. So we need to get Dan back to talk. He wants to talk about gremlins because that's a really interesting story. The story of
what particular gremlins?
Well, the concept of gremlins, the idea of gremlins. Okay. Yeah. Where do they fit into the sort of Bomber Command culture, heritage, and then how it's been written about afterwards? So that's really interesting. Anyway,
very interesting.
That's what I got up to. What have you been up to, Jim?
Well, I've had quite a quiet weekend, actually. I've been sort of reading up, and I'm just sort of slightly head down with Casino, if I'm brutally honest. But I tell you what, I really enjoyed those discussions about Alamein, and it's made me. I've had all sorts of interesting things, and one of the things that I suppose it seems so obvious, but is your point about Britain fighting in places where it's least convenient for the enemy to do so.
Yeah,
and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, that's a really, really good point. And I really buy it. And yet, the only reason they're there in the first place is because the Italians invade Egypt.
Right.
But what were the Axis forces thinking? The more I think about it, what were they thinking? Yeah. What were they thinking? If you can just... What was Hitler's point? Why did he send off Rommel in February 1941? Well, he sends him off because... he's worried about his southern flank. But what's the best way to protect your southern flank?
Well, not get engaged in North Africa.
Not getting engaged in North Africa. It's insane. What's the one thing that the Axis forces have the least of compared to their other major competence?
Well, it's logistic merchant navy support.
Correct.
Basically.
It's merchant shipping.
Yeah.
And even by the end of 1941... they've got considerably less than they had. So there's a reason why Wanklyn and the Upholder are the highest scoring Allied submarine of the war in terms of tonnage sunk. And that's because they're operating in 1941. Well,
and because the Mediterranean's tiny.
Yes, but they're getting things like the Conti Rosso, which is 18,000 tons.
Yeah.
If you're sinking a couple of them, and then there's a few others in there's Oceana, isn't there, or whatever it's called, in November 1941, which they sink. And if you're getting a few kind of 15 to 20,000 ton ships, you're soon getting up to 128,000 tons, aren't you?
Yeah.
So they're not the U-boat. They're not the submarine that sinks the most boats. They're the submarine that sinks the biggest number of amount of tonnage.
Biggest tonnage, yeah.
And that's because there are bigger boats, the bigger vessels at the start of the war than there are by 1943 when all the big boys have gone.
But if you're a submarine force, Jim, the place to pick a fight is in the Med anyway, because there's choke points, There's narrow straits.
Yeah.
There's, where the ports are. It's not a great big, thousands of miles wide and long ocean like the Atlantic, right?
No. But
of all places for the Axis to put pressure on its merchant shipping, it's the point I'm making. They're running out of merchant shipping and they're putting pressure on it in an environment where it's easier for the British to prosecute submarine warfare. So you're compounding the problem, aren't you? You're by trying to supply North Africa, you're compounding the issue that you're short of shipping by doing it in a place where,
it's really easy to sink them. It's not like the Atlantic, which is vast and huge.
Yeah.
And you haven't got enough naval forces to protect them. You haven't got enough air forces to protect them.
Yeah.
So you are literally on a hiding to nothing. And then comes this moment in the end of May 1942 when Rommel manages to have this lucky break because of the ineptitude of the British commanders.
Yeah.
And takes Tobruk on the 21st of June. And it's all doom and gloom for the British, and it's the flap, and everyone thinks we're rubbish, and, morale has taken a massive dip and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But actually, you need to, one needs to step back from that and go, okay, just let's stop looking at it through the prism of kind of, how depressed Winston is. Let's look at it through the prism of the Axis forces.
Yeah.
Actually, it's literally the worst thing that could have happened to them, because it gives them this tantalizing glint of the Middle East oil fields and this sort of, this El Dorado in the distance that they might just be able to get. And so they gallop off into the desert. By the time they get to the Alamein land, but by the 3rd of July, it is so game over for Rommel. It's not true.
Yeah.
Because he hasn't broken through. And at that point, because he's reached his culmination point, it's unwinnable from that point.
Yeah,
because of shipping, because of supplies, because of the length of their supply lines, because it's just literally not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, was there an alternative at that moment? Well, I think there was, and had it not been Hitler, and thank goodness it was from that point of view. Had it not been Hitler, you're just looking at it from a purely military point of view. What could the Axis have done? Well, what they could have done is they could have retreated in stages back to Tobruk, then Benghazi, and then bugged out across the Tripoli and go, okay, this is not going to happen. Enough
is enough.
American stuff is coming. Enough is enough. Yeah. Let's really fortify our southern flank, and let's just think really rationally here. Where are the Allies likely to attack? Sicily. It's the obvious one.
Yeah.
So build up your defenses in Sicily. And you know what, these Italians, let's train them. Let's train them. Yeah, let's take a bit of time out and let's train them. And let's train them in our methods, and we'll be in charge, and we'll send them to battle school and we'll get them better. Suddenly, southern Italy and Sicily become a nut that you are simply not going to crack from an Allied point of view.
Yeah.
Instead,
because you shouldn't be able to pluck Sicily from the Axis vine in the way that the Allies do. When people talk about it, it's too slow and it takes too long. It's it's unnecessary or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, no, quite the opposite. If you're thinking it like you're saying, if you're thinking in terms of Axis shipping, Axis ability to fight. And the Allies bringing their advantages to bear, the Germans are setting themselves up for a series of defeats, aren't they? But then this is, like all Second World War what ifs. Your what if revolves around the Nazis thinking completely differently to the way they did.
Yes.
Like the idea that they'd train the Italians, they'd help their allies rather than, just go on about how rubbish they were and slag them off relentlessly amongst themselves. That ain't accommodated by the Nazi worldview.
But you're not going to help your Italian allies 3Ms by constantly slagging them off and telling them how rubbish they are. It's just not going to work, and it doesn't. And then reinforcing Tunisia just seems an act of utter insanity. The more you think about it, the crazier it is. The amount of resources, but because it's not reinforcing Tunisia per se that's the issue. It's the fact that only by exhausting yet more incredibly vulnerable shipping are you able to do it. And why bother? And it's because Hitler's so paranoid about his southern flank. But if you're paranoid about your southern flank, make sure your southern flank is really well defended and don't overreach your southern flank.
Don't burn up men, materiel, gold, treasure and blood on a battle where you can't you're absolutely right. Sicily should be untakeable from a
yes.
I
mean, Hitler would say, but the problem is then if we leave these places, and then the Allies can still operate from Egypt and operate against Ploesti. Yeah, but it's a hell of a lot further from Egypt than it is from Foggia.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Sicily.
Exactly.
Or
exactly.
So.
But then German appreciation of Allied strategic thinking, or Hitler's appreciation of it, is lacking. So the guy doesn't have the strategic, isn't thinking, what are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to do? He's not thinking in those terms. He's not thinking, are they going to attempt to strategically bomb the oil fields I have access to? He does not think, he doesn't seem to be thinking like that. He's not taking it enough into account, is he?
No. And I was just, so that was one of my kind of big takeaways, really, is just that absolutely, and I don't think any historians haven't really sat back and just said German involvement and Italian involvement in northern Italy, in North Africa, was insane because they don't have the shipping to support it.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the big failures of the Axis forces, is that for the most part, they don't have to worry about shipping. I mean, the Italians do if they're going to go around the Mediterranean, obviously.
Yeah.
But again, that's another sign of Mussolini's woeful geopolitical understanding.
Yeah.
But the Germans really should know better. All they've got to do is they've got to keep the south quiet so that they can get on with the Eastern Front and defend the Western Front.
Yeah.
So the way to do that is to not get embroiled in the Mediterranean, where you've got shipping involved, because you're never going to compete with the Allies. You're just never going to. And if you haven't done it by end of 1941, it's never going to happen. Well,
unless you fill the Mediterranean with destroyers to deal with the submarine threat.
Yeah, but they don't have them. They don't have them,
which they don't have. So you can't do that. So you shouldn't.
So don't
try and
do something that you don't get involved.
Yeah.
But play to your strengths, not to your weaknesses. And that's what
whereas
they're doing.
Whereas the British, because after all, I mean, you could argue that in a way, North Africa is the center of British imperial gravity, strategically. Britain itself is the center of imperial money, but the imperial center of gravity, where everyone can get to in roughly the same amount of time, is the Middle East, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you can be blitzing London all you like, but the British Empire could still draw reinforcements from India, Australia, and New Zealand to North Africa without the blitz affecting that. Yeah. And I think that's a blind. It's obvious if you're looking at in terms of an imperial effort. This is the other way. You've got to always think of the British war effort as an imperial war effort.
Yep.
You can't. The minute you forget that, you forget actually how it's working and what resources are really being drawn on and how they're being deployed and the way they're being deployed the way they are. And that obviously brings its own tensions because Eighth Army is, I don't know, is it a third British and then everyone else is from all over, and it's exactly not even that, maybe a quarter, and it's got Free French as well. You've got all these people or Fighting French, all these people in the mix. It's. And then that reflects a British war effort, and that's why the war in North Africa is being fought the way it is as well. That's why it's disjointed. The Eighth Army effort is because it's an amalgam Eighth Army rather than a single force. And every Commonwealth general is a political general as well as an operational one. There's lots of plates spinning. So you can see why, if it's not led firmly, the wheels might come off quite quickly, which is, after all, Kinlek quits, hands it over to Ritchie, and Ritchie can't control the thing, keep the thing under control. Which I've watched the rest of Rogue Heroes, by the way.
Yes, it's great fun, isn't it?
You watched it to the end?
I've got one episode to go.
I've watched it to the end, and I'll say I think it improves enormously. And there's a very, very good bit where well, first of all, I'm glad that the general public.
I like the Benghazi raid. I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, that's really good. But I'm going to love I love the fact that the public will now know what a static line is, and no longer have to explain what a static line parachute is.
Weirdly, by episode 4, they've got rid of their slightly odd, non-existent Ray-Bans that didn't exist at that point, and have gone back to form and got round sunglasses and sun goggles, which is what they should have had in the first place.
Yeah,
and frankly, a load cooler. So I just don't know why they didn't go for them in the first place.
I mean, I think it. I mean, lots of TV programs. The first episode, very often people watch a sitcom and they go, "Oh, I don't like it. The first episode wasn't funny." You think, well, the first episode has got lots of things. It's got to get everything up on its stilts, basically, and and pilots of things are there to placate commissioners, But there's a really great bit where, Maine is been. And here's a spoiler: Maine is training these French guys.
Oh yeah,
and Sterling says to him, "You're like Achilles sulking in his tent."
Yes.
And you think, yeah, because Paddy Maine is Achilles. This story is as old as time, and it doesn't matter if the language is contemporary. It's the story of it's the tale of Achilles, and let's say Sterling is Ulysses, using his cunning and his guile to get what he wants in terms of a regiment, and using other people to do that for him. And Maine is the invincible warrior, and he's Achilles. And if that's actually the story you're telling here of dust and sand and gods of war, there you go. That's what Rogue Heroes is about. And
I quite enjoyed watching, Jeeps and Chevrolets hurtling across the desert with Highway to Hell playing in the background. It worked for me. I've got to say, I thought it was terrific. I still don't think they haven't got Sterling right, and they haven't got Paddy Maine right. I thought the guy who's playing Jock Lewis, who I'm sure was a servant in Downton Abbey.
No, it was Alfie Allen playing Jock
Lewis.
But
wasn't he in?
I don't know. Was he? I don't know.
I think
he's Reek from Game of Thrones, anyway.
Oh yes, of course. Anyway, he's. I thought he was very good, I thought the way they handled his. Don't want to spoil it, but death was.
That's a matter of historical fact.
It's a matter of historical fact.
This is the other.
I'm betrayed.
That's not a spoiler in itself.
But I thought that was all done very, very, very well and effectively, and also he kind of looked right. He looked the right part. I'm still very taken by the depictions of Cooper and Seekings and Mike Sadler. I think they're terrific. But I've enjoyed it. I think it's great. I think it's really good fun, and I think they get the essence of it and the spirit of it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But there's a classic wrong tank in the last episode, though.
Oh no.
Well, no. You know what? I've come around to the idea that if it's got a wrong tank in it, then it's the real deal.
How so?
Well, then it's a proper war film if it's got a wrong tank in it.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, because all war films have the wrong tanks in.
Exactly right. It's a proper war film thing if it's got the wrong tank in it.
Well, I hope it does really well for the BBC, because if it does, then they'll hopefully commission some more. I think it's terrific, and I think I've really enjoyed it, I have to say.
Yeah.
One episode to go. I'm going to treat myself tonight.
Well, and I'm looking forward to, what happens next. Are
they doing series 2?
Well, I imagine it'll get picked up. I imagine it will.
They can do the Capo de
Porco. Yeah. So you've got Chatterton swimming ashore and being picked up by this gang of lunatics.
Turbally and all the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. Chatterton in his underwear, like scrabbling around.
So presumably it finishes with Sidi Hanish, does it?
Well, you haven't seen it yet. I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil it. But you know what happens to David Sterling, right? Right. So
in the bag. February 43.
Exactly. That's how else would you end the 6 episodes, but with that, anyway, but I think it's about Achilles. It's about Agamemnon. It's about Ulysses. Yeah. And if you place it in that context, then I think you need to because there was an argument yesterday on social media. The guy playing Maine isn't tall enough. He won't be imposing enough if he's not tall enough. You think, well, they're playing him as quite imposing. He's being played as imposing. There's
he's definitely being played imposing.
So I think
he was nicer, and I think he was more charming and nicer.
I think he was and quieter. Yeah,
quieter, nicer, and kind of, he did go berserk. There's absolutely no question about that when he was pissed. But I don't think he was going around going berserk when he was. I think he saved that for when he was in Cairo.
Yeah.
I think what they should do is do a drama about a tank regiment and a band of brothers.
Yeah, I think
personally.
Well, one thing at a time, Jim. Well,
yeah, then we got Masters of the Air coming up, so that's all exciting.
Yeah, I know. Well, exactly. You see, exactly. You see, exactly. Yeah. And you know what? In the end, what I think SAS Rogue Heroes is about what war does to people. It's David Sterling thinks that what he really wants is a war and an adventure, and then he finds it's actually something really quite difficult to cope with. And he's not very good at the soldiering. It's the thing that you know they are doing in the drama.
Yeah,
you know what it does to people, and that's after all what modern dramatists are interested in, rather than telling a sort of straight back version of Jolly Good Chaps. You know. Anyway, it's I think we've probably
done enough, haven't we? For one
talked
day.
Around. That's the attitude, James.
But it was good fun. That felt old school. It's like
yes, it did. We will see you all very soon. Thanks for listening, and cheerio.
Cheerio.